Ngwiza Mnkandla has had extensive experience in church work spanning a period of over 30 years. Ngwiza has started and led several companies in the business world, as well as being on different boards in the corporate sector. Ngwiza holds first degrees in accountancy and theology and a master's in business administration. He is married to Dr. Maureen Mnkandla, and together they have 2 adult daughters who are working in North America.
Good morning. It's nice to see your faces. I always like to take a moment to look at who I'm talking to. Wonderful. Our lives are a summary of the experiences that we go through. And what you are today is probably a summation of some of the experiences that you've gone through. There are 2 major experiences in my life that I'd like to throw at you today that will help you maybe in processing the journey that you are thinking about during these 2 days. The first of those experiences occurred when I was a very young man. I was doing my grade 6. I was born and raised in a village. I need to tell you this. I was born and raised in a village in Lower Gweru. And my first 6 years of schooling were out there in the village. And my first experience was when I got thrown out of school. My headmaster, while I was doing towards the end of my grade 7, called my parents and told them that he was chucking me out of his school. Now, great confusion because we couldn't understand what was going on. I was doing very well in school. School liked me and I liked school. And my grades were good. And so my headmaster calls my parents and says, "I'm throwing your son out of my school." When they protested that I was doing well, he said, "Well, the reason I'm throwing him out is because he's doing well." He says, "My school is not good enough for your son to do his grade 7. He needs to go to a city school that will challenge him. Because if he does his grade 7 here, he is not going to make it to secondary school. He needs a city school that's going to challenge his mind." And ladies and gentlemen, that's how I left the village. And the following year, I found myself doing grade 7 in a school in Bulawayo. And let me tell you that it was because of that headmaster that I'm standing before you today. I'm one of 7 kids, 7 siblings in my family. And none of them made it to secondary school. I'm the only one who made it to secondary school because my headmaster threw me out of his school. When I got to the city, the lights were very bright. I don't have time to go into that story. But it was that exposure that led me to where I am today. Initially, great confusion. Initially, this little kid who's grown up in the village is now in the city. I'm away from the trees I used to climb, the rivers I used to play at, around the people that I used to be with, the culture that I was used to. And I'm in this city with the bright lights. I want to tell you that experience, if it was not for that experience, I would not be standing before you today. Many of us have villages that we need to live in our lives. You have an environment that you grew up in. You're familiar with your surroundings. You can actually get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom without turning the lights on. Your village dictates what you can do and what you can't do. Your village tells you this is possible and this is not possible. Your village limits your exposure, limits your environment, your ability to defines your success. Tells you that this is success. I go back to the village now, and some of my classmates who I went to school with, are in the village. They have a Scotch cart, they have a wheelbarrow, they have their own plow, and that's success for them. They've got their spine of oxen, that's success for them. But for me, because of the exposure that I've had in life, that is not how I define success. I used to play with wire cars. But now I'm driving the real things, okay? Because I left the village. Some of you are stuck in a village. Now, your village may not be literal like my village. Your village may be Highfields, your village may be Borrowdale, your village may be whatever. We all have villages that we need to get out of. You need to be exposed so that you think differently, your mind is open to new things. Have you left your village? If you're going to succeed in reaching your destination, your destiny, it is important that you leave your village. You are here in these 2 days. Part of your consideration must be, what's my village? You need to ask your neighbor, what is your village? You know, you need to define your village and say, this is what limits me. Part of what limits you is your thinking, your village, the people around you. They define who you are and where you're going to go because of that village mentality. That experience changed my life. And I am what I am today, partly because of that one. This second experience I talk about is one that occurred when I was much older. 1995, we are in South Korea. A number of, about 50 African leaders had been invited by a church in South Korea from, you know, leaders from the religious world. We'd been invited to visit South Korea and experience the prayer movement there and what was happening and so on. So we visited prayer mountains, we visited churches and so on. But one of the places that we visited that transformed my thinking was the University of
Korea.
What is the capital city of South
Seoul.
Korea? In
Seoul.
Seoul. Yeah. We visited a university there, and that experience just changed my life. So we go into this university, and we are taken around the grounds of the university. And it's Yensel University, that's the name I was looking for. We're taken around the grounds of this university, and we end up in a lecture theater where we are watching a movie of former students who were coming back to the university to say thank you to the university for what university had done in their lives. I saw their diplomats, I saw businessmen, I saw, you know, different men and women from different walks of life coming back to say thank you to their university. In fact, the year before, they had built on the university campus a museum in honor of their university. Something hit me as I watched these students talking about their life experiences and what university had done for them. The only way that I described that was that I was hit by a Korean spirit. There was something in the lives of those men and women that I knew I didn't have and I wanted for myself. I thought about my own university. I had graduated from the university. I came through the university of, my first degree was through the University of Zimbabwe. And I graduated in 1980. And in 1980, we were the last ones to be given the opportunity, the option to have on our certificate University of Rhodesia or University of Zimbabwe. And you can tell, you can guess what we decided on. My certificate has got University of Zimbabwe because we were so proud of walking into the new nation. I knew that as a nation, we were becoming independent late in the day, and we had the experience of other African countries that had become independent, and no ways were we going to make some of the mistakes that the African countries had made. And here I am sitting in South Korea and regretting that I had actually chosen University of Zimbabwe, because at that time people didn't know whether you'd actually got the certificate genuinely or whether you'd bought it. And so I'm sitting there, and as I'm watching this movie, tears just start flowing down my face. And in fact, for days I wept, and I didn't understand why I was crying. In the course of those, days, I began to realize something, that I was actually ashamed of being a graduate of the University of Zimbabwe. I'd gone back to the university during our days. You had 5-course meals. The place was like a hotel. I mean, some of the residences were like hotels. They were so great. But going back, you know, you were just amazed at the dilapidation and the state of repair or disrepair that the campus, you know, had gotten into. And I realized that I was actually embarrassed to be a graduate of that university. Here are these guys so proud of their university. Not only were they proud of their university, but they were proud of their country. I realized that not only was I embarrassed to be a graduate of the University of Zimbabwe, but I was actually embarrassed to be a Zimbabwean. The mistakes that I had thought that our country would never make, I mean, we'd gone rapid, so we descended so rapidly, it was unbelievable. And I was embarrassed to be a Zimbabwean. I was embarrassed to be an African. As I traveled around the world, not only did they want to search the linings of my suitcase, but they wanted to search the linings of my stomach. Because Nigerians were ingesting drugs, and that's how they were trafficking. You know, that's why they were transporting these drugs. And so I found myself embarrassed to be an African. I was embarrassed to be black. Because somehow it looked like we as Africans were cursed. And I began to ask the question, what is wrong with us? Why is it that you give an African, you know, a country and pretty soon it's falling apart? Why is it that you give an African a house and before you know it, it's in such a state of disrepair you don't want to live in it? Why is it that you give an African a car and pretty soon chickens are laying eggs in it? Are we cursed? Is there something wrong with us? I began to say to the Lord, Lord, what's going on? Are we cursed as Africans? You got to answer that question in your mind. Because as I sat there, that's why I was crying. Because I realized that something needed to change inside me. I realized that something had died inside me. The pride that I was seeing amongst these Korean students was not there in me. I wasn't proud of my country. I wasn't proud of being an African. In fact, I was embarrassed that I was an African. And over the course of those days, I was asking myself the question, what is it going to take for that spirit, that pride to come back? How do I resurrect that pride inside me that will make me move forward? As a leader in Africa, what do I do? What is it that I'm going to do that's going to resurrect the African spirit to a place where once again we are proud to be African? And in that pride, not in a negative sense, but in that, you know, a positive pride, again pick up the pieces and begin to build our nations. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say to you that unless you too develop that spirit within you, we are doomed as a country. Unless you guys walk away from this place with that spirit inside you to say we are Zimbabwean and we are proud of our nation and we can stand up and be counted, we're not going anywhere as a nation. And so 7 words began to develop in my spirit. And let me throw these at you very quickly. 7 words that will resurrect. As I meditated, as I thought about why I was crying, as I thought about the issues, and as I began to say, what will it take for us to develop this spirit once again, to resurrect this spirit? Here are 7 words that developed in my spirit. These are very simple words. The first word was identity. That I needed to regain a pride in my identity as an African. And guys, if you do not develop an identity as Zimbabweans and you're proud of who you are, we are not going to be authentic. We are going to be photocopies. We are going to be copycats. How many of you realize that we somehow are not proud of our identity? I mean, we have Africans killing each other over, European football teams. Look at the clothes we wear. Look at the songs we sing. Look at your lifestyles. You guys, if you're not careful, you are constantly trying to be American, British, you're constantly trying to be somebody else other than who you are. And unless you come to a place where you're comfortable in your own skin, you're constantly going to be chasing a dream that you will never, catch up to. And so you need to be comfortable with your own identity. In fact, as I thought about the fact that I'm an African, I began to rejoice that I'm an African. How many of you know that we have so much to be proud of as Africans? Do you know that life probably began in Africa? The oldest, scientists will tell you that the oldest human fossils were found in Africa. Probably began around the Great Lakes, they say. And a civilization developed there that eventually migrated down the River Nile. When you travel down the River Nile, you'll find different sets of pyramids until you get to Egypt, where you get the most mature, the biggest of all. And that civilization probably reached its peak when it finally got to Egypt. It had one of the first writings, the hieroglyphics. Those people had science, they had medicine, they knew how to embalm bodies, they had mathematics. When you look at the pyramids in Egypt, I don't know if you've had the privilege of visiting Egypt, but when you visit the pyramids, those huge structures, I mean, you talk about how they moved those rocks. They traveled around the world. You hear about Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus and all these guys. No. There were Africans in the places they went to even before they got there. How many of you know that if you go to India today, you will see a black Indian? You will see black Indians. I'm not talking about black as in they're Indian, dark in skin. No, I'm talking about black as in Ngwiza, like me with kinky hair, like I have. How many of you know that you go to China, you'll go wang with black Chinese like me? Go to Australia, go to the West Indies. I mean, there were blacks there before the slave trade. Where did they come from? If you go to West Africa, they'll tell you that, there are certain trees that if you, cut and dig out, make a huge canoe, put enough food in there, wait for the right monsoon, the sea will carry you wherever you want to go. And so we traveled. If you want to talk about our history, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that somebody has written our history in a manner that hides the heritage that we have.
Sure.
Our history was not written by Africans. Our history is written from the West. And it has been changed. And some of the achievements that ought to be attributed to Africans are not there. You need to dig. There are new scholars today who are writing books that are telling us about who we are. And I want you to develop a pride in being an African. You'll never change your identity. You were born here. Despite all the creams we use and everything else and all that on our hair and stuff like that, you're as African as you'll never change that. So you better settle down to accepting the fact that you're black and that's who you are. And be comfortable in yours. The first thing you need to be comfortable in is your identity. Your identity. Who are you? I mean, I could talk about history. I could talk about those of you who are spiritual. I could talk about the spiritual history of this country, of this continent. I could talk about just, you talk about Christianity, you talk about Judaism, you talk about Islam. All these three major religions that have shaken the world had their roots in Africa. Africa has contributed to these three major religions. Talk about wealth. We are one of the richest continents in the world. Did you know that we are one of the richest continents in the world? The mineral wealth of Africa is incredible. I could spew out some statistics here. We have 90% of the cobalt in the world. We have 50% of the gold reserves in the world. You're worrying about the gold that, you know, the colonialists took. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about what's left. Talk about Zimbabwe alone. I mean, did you know that Marangwe is valued at over $800 billion US dollars? What are you talking about? We are a rich and yet we carry this beggar mentality. The reserves, the mineral reserves in Africa are absolutely incredible. Talk about copper, talk about, I mean, we've got it all. Talk about space. Do you know that you can take America, you can take Europe, you can take China, you can take South America, and you can fit them into Africa in terms of space. Mm-hmm. And people are telling you that we are overpopulated. What are they talking about? We've got plenty of room in Africa. When I visit overseas, and you know the mentality that we live on trees, and I say, well, come to Africa and we'll give you your own tree. So be comfortable with your identity. The first word was identity. The second word was responsibility. I realized that if we were going to resurrect the African spirit, we needed to resurrect a sense of responsibility in the African. We tend to push off responsibility to somebody else. How many of you know that the problems that we have in Africa are because of the colonialists? Hello? you know that? When this present government speaks, they say Smith and his boys messed it up. That's why we are in the problems that we're in. If MDC had taken over government, do you know what they would have said? ZANU-PF. And when you take over government, do you know what you're going to say? We are always blaming somebody else. You're blaming your mother. You're blaming your parents. You say, oh, you don't know my parents. That's why I am what I am. It's because of my parents. You don't know my school. You know, you don't know my boss. We always blame, shifting and pushing it off onto somebody else. Nobody stops to take responsibility. I had an argument with God one day when I said to God, God, why is it that the African, you didn't give the African a scientific mind to realize that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line? I mean, if you've seen our roads, in the villages in particular, what are they like? Are they straight highways or do they go like this? Why do they go like that? I said, Lord, what's wrong with our mentality? And I realized something. When those roads begin, they're straight. A tree falls, it's not my responsibility. A mount grows, it's not my responsibility. A dead donkey is on the path, it's not my responsibility. When the next person comes, they look for the last footsteps and they follow, and very soon a new rut begins. And so here we go. That's why as Africans, we are not going anywhere, because we refuse to take responsibility. Nobody says the buck stops on my door. Sure. Let me tell you that this country doesn't owe you anything. You owe the country something, and nobody is going to give you a free meal. There is no such thing as a free meal. There is no such thing as free aid. Take it out of your mind. America and all the Western countries are not going to give you anything for nothing. Anything that they give is calculated from their own vantage point of view. It has to fit their own foreign policy. It has to fit their future, where they want to go. They have thought it out carefully, and whatever aid they give is in line with where they want things to go. Because there is no free meal. Nobody's going to give you anything for nothing. And so you got to take responsibility. You got to say the buck stops here. I mean, I could give you my life now is not about. let me tell you that life is not what it should be. It is what it is. Okay? If you want to write a statement, I read this the other day. Life is not what it should be. It is what it is. And you got to take it. Your response is what makes the difference. And so, are you going to be responsible? So, when I look around me, I'm looking for a generation of young people who are going to say, yeah, we know things are not what they should be. But we're going to change them. Yeah. We're going to take responsibility and we're going to shift things. And so I'm challenging you as you sit here, don't look at your circumstance. Don't be limited by your circumstance. Yeah, it's not what it should be. It is just what it is. And your response is what's going to make the difference. So take responsibility. Now, I don't sit around and wait for some. Who's going to change our traffic system? Who's going to change the combi culture in this? Do you know that these people are defining our thinking? The combi drivers are defining our thinking. Who's going to change that? Who's going to change the rot in the corruption in this nation? Who's going to change that? Somebody's got to take responsibility and say, we're going to change this. There's got to be a generation that says, we've had enough of this and we're not going to have it anymore. I'm driving down the road one day and somebody cuts into me badly. I mean, I was going to Kambuzu, I was going to Fakosi, and I was in Kambuzuma, and this guy cuts into me badly. And I just got a little angry. I was going to do a home group. I had my Bible next to me and my notebook with my notes. So I decided, no, I'm not going to have this. So I hit my accelerator and I overtook him, and I stopped right in the middle of the road. I put my hazard lights on and I got out of my car. He stops, he's forced to stop. So I get out of my car and I get my notebook. And instead of going to his door, I looked at his license disc, I looked at his tires, I went around my car. Eventually I got to his door, I said, driver's license, please. and he's all, you know, he pulls out his driver's license, I look at him, and then I say, according to road traffic section such and such, I spat off all this stuff, and I said, you violated, you know, the he's going, sir. I said, you give us work. And I hit him with his license. I just, you know, tapped him on his face and I said, don't do it again. I got him in the car and I drove. You gotta take responsibility. Come on, man. I'm driving down the road to my house one day. At that time I was living in Borodale. And past Simbabwes village. And normally at lunchtime there's no traffic there. And on this particular day, I can't get past the place. It takes me ages. We crawl eventually. You know where they used to have those tall trees, the pine trees? Eventually, I get there and I realize what has happened. One of those tall trees has fallen across the road, blocking both lanes. And what's happening? Cars are going off the road onto a ditch, side road, back, ditch, onto the road again. That's why it was taking us forever. Well, I did that too. Ditch, side road, ditch, back onto the road. But my house was just a couple of streets down the road. When I got home, I got my grounds engineer. It's not called the garden boy, it's the grounds engineer. And I said, X rope, we're gonna sort out that tree. We got onto the car, got back there, and I wanted to pull the tree out of the way using my car, but my car was too small. The guy across the road sees what I'm trying to do. He's got a 4x4. He comes, and we hook up, you know, we hook up the tree on his, you know, rope on his 4x4, and in a few seconds, we had the tree out of the way. Guess what? Traffic was flowing again. How many of you know that we are responsible for the condition of our nation? When there are problems, don't look for the city council, the potholes. What are we going to do about these things? Are we going to wait for government? unless somebody stands up and says the buck stops here, this nation is doomed. You guys have got to rise up and take responsibility. Our generation has made a mess of things. But if you do not take responsibility, your children are going to live in worse conditions than you're living in. Yeah. Identity, responsibility, accountability was the third word. Africans are notoriously unaccountable. We do not want to be, accountable. Don't ask me. We have this chieftainship mentality that I can do what I like to do, what I want to do, and don't ask me, to be accountable. Government doesn't want to be made accountable. Husbands don't want to be accountable to their wives. You Shona and Debele men, you say that as a husband, don't ask me where I've been. Don't ask me how I'm spending my money. I'm the man in this house. No accountability. Stewardship is another word. Stewardship is another word that goes with accountability. Africans are notoriously bad at stewardship. I ask myself, when I give you something, when I loan you my car, or sometimes, there's people that I don't want to loan things to because they're just not good stewards. You know that if you give them an item or an asset, when it comes back, it will be worse off than, before you gave it to them. So stewardship is another thing. I've talked about houses and cars in the country and so on. We are bad stewards. And God help us. We could spend a day talking about stewardship. Unless you learn to be a good steward of your time, a good steward of everything around you, you're not going to go anywhere. The next word that came to my mind was the word creativity. Who says that our solutions must come from the West? What has stopped us from being creative as Africans? Why are we not creative anymore? Scientifically, why is it that we're waiting for the West or some other country to come up with solutions to our problems? What has stopped that creative flow within us? Who told you that your solutions are going to come from somewhere else? Do you realize that we actually have the answers to our own problems? I listen to ESAP, I listen to all these different programs that we've had as a nation, economic, revival programs and so on, and I laugh because they are just a rehash of some other program somewhere else. We haven't, learned to actually be creative and do something with what we have. Unless you guys are creative and you take the little bit that is in your hands and you start working with it. We're talking about this gap here, this chasm that's there between your destiny and where you are right now. There is a gap here, and you've got to be creative in terms of, bridging this gap. Because nobody is going to come and give you the resources that you need to actually make it. If you think somebody is going to, give you everything on a platter, you are wrong. Begin with where you are. Start with the little bit that you've got and work on it. Be a good steward. Be creative with the little bit that you've got. My mother amazes me. She's 96 years old. That woman is something else. For most of our lives, my father wasn't there. But my mother never ran short of ideas. We never ran hungry. She always had a plan. If there was a problem before we went to sleep, by the time we got up in the morning, she had a plan. That woman was so in creative, it was unreal. And she always had solutions to problems. Well, what's happened to us? Why is it that we've lost, creativity? I think the final word that I'd like to throw at you is the word discipline. And I have to be disciplined because I'm running out of my time. I've run out of my time. Discipline with our time. Africans are notorious when it comes to timekeeping. We boast about the fact that the West may have watches, but we have the time. What utter nonsense. How many of you know that a minute in America is the same as here? And how many of you know that we're competing globally? And unless we learn to keep time, unless we respect time, let me tell you, we waste a lot of it hanging around and just doing nothing. Unless we learn to do that, we're going to be left far behind in terms of the competition. We are competing globally. How many of you know that you're eating chickens from Brazil? And they're cheaper than chickens you can produce here. How many of you know that we're buying, as a country right now, we're not manufacturing, much at all. We're buying stuff from outside. And you tell me that you have the time. Those guys, because they respect time, they'll produce goods at a lower price than you will. It will cost more to produce locally than it does to produce outside because we do not respect time. Discipline with gratification, where we have delayed gratification. An African, makes a little bit of money, and before you know it, we are painting the town. How many of you know that we have Indians in this country? Have you seen an Indian boy driving a Mercedes? What cars do they drive? They drive Corollas. And are they loaded as far as money is concerned? Those guys are loaded with money, but they drive Corollas. You get an African, make a little bit of money, and before you know it, Mercedes bad. You move from the township to Boroda. You don't have the economic base to sustain the kind of lifestyle you want to sustain. Discipline. One of the things I do with some of the young men that I disciple when I visit them is I want to see their bedrooms. I want to walk into your girls, relax, I want to do it. I want to see your bedroom. I want to see if there's order in your bedroom. Some of you, you look smart here, but your bedroom looks like there's been a tornado that hit the place. Because everything is all over the place. Discipline. If you can't be disciplined with things around you, do you think your thoughts are going to be disciplined? Do you think you're going to put your mind together in terms of how do we get this bus? This 4x4, how do we get it to the Okobanga? If you are not disciplined to put things in sequence, sequentially and in order, and to think until that confusion goes, you're not going to make it in life, friends. I spend ages talking about these 7 words. And I just want to...
You've got one more, principled leadership. You've only given us 6.
I've only given you 6. All right, thank you. Thank you. Principled leadership. I skipped principled leadership.
I can run them by you guys. Identity, responsibility, stewardship, accountability, creativity, discipline.
And then principled leadership. Principled leadership is about, what kind of principles do you have in your leadership? Our politicians make promises that they forget immediately after the celebrations. There's no principle. What kind of, if you're going to lead us, we need you to define where you're taking us to. You see, this bus is very important. I'm not going to get onto your bus until I know where you're going. Some of you go to, down the road here, where are we? 4th Avenue? Down the road here, there's a combi terminus there. You don't just jump into any combi, do you? You got to find out where this combi is going to. Otherwise, you jump into the wrong combi. You're going to Mabuku, and this thing is going to Kwazana. Opposite direction. You got to know where the bus is going. Principled leadership is about spelling out where you're going and how you're going to get there, so that people understand that if they follow you, this is what they can expect from your leadership. And Africa does not have principled leaders. And so, as I was thinking about these 7 words, it became clear to me that we need men and women who are going to spell out their direction clearly, so that those who follow them are able to challenge them on the basis of the values that they've espoused and articulated very clearly. What are your values? Where are you taking the bus to? How are we going to challenge you? Do we have men and women who can say, I broke one of my own values, and therefore I'm going to resign? I'm going to step down from leadership because I failed. You can hold me accountable to these values, to these principles, because this is what I'm aiming for. Folks, I need to stop because I've gone over my time. I pray that you would leave your village. If you're going to make it, you've got to leave your village. That thinking, that mentality that keeps you locked in, that defines success, that says nobody in this village has ever done this, so stop trying. That limits you and keeps pulling you back. The people in your village are constantly pulling you back. Your friends, your people around you are saying it's never been done by anybody. So what do you think you're doing? That village mentality has got to go. And you've got to broaden your thinking. The world out there is big. You got to step into that big world out there. For me, if I hadn't left my primary school, I'd never have made it. Became the only one in my family, not only to get to secondary school, but to get to university. Not only to get to university, but to work in environments where today I have led international movements. A few years ago, we were living in the States, leading an international organization. I've traveled around the world. I've been to all sorts of places. I've done things, and I'll tell you, I would never have managed to do any of that if my headmaster hadn't thrown me out of that school. I'd be drinking beer today in the village, perhaps with a few missing teeth, and maybe even have died of AIDS because of sharing women in the village. Many of my friends have died, and it all has happened this way because one day my headmaster kicked me out of the village, and I left the village. So I challenge you to leave your village and then begin to think broadly on these 7 words. They may just resurrect a pride in you where you say, we're going to change things. I'm working in my village right now. By the way, I've gone back to the village. I'm working in my village right now. We've got a project. We have 35 women working on a particular project. We just built a community hall for our chief. I'm going back on Friday because the police officer who's in charge of the police station in my village has said, look, come and help me. I want to redo the police station. I mean, if you go to our police station, it's a joke in the village. And I go there and I say, no, the police guys are working for us in the village. I'm not going to operate from an office like this. So I'm going there on Friday, and I do have a construction team. We're going to be looking at how to change that situation. The clinic down the road, they're delivering babies using candlelight. And I'm saying, no, that shouldn't be. So I've got big dreams about my village. Not only do you leave the village, but you go back to the village, a transformed person with a different thinking where you're taking responsibility and you change your communities. That's how we're going to change Zimbabwe. By the way, we'll only change Zimbabwe a village at a time. And unless we think about the rural areas, my friends, it's going to take a long time to change this nation. I got to stop.
Thank you.